Bliss and Grit is an entirely listener-supported show. Supporting us is also designed to support you through keeping the episodes rolling, but also through rewards for your donation, like a Getting Started guide, a private forum, and downloadable meditations. To become a supporting member, you can visit patreon.com/bliss and grit. Hello, beautifuls. You're listening to Bliss and Grit. I'm Brooke Thomas, and I'll be joined soon by my dear friend and co-host, Vanessa Scotto. On the show, we're having conversations about the awakening spiritual path. And what does that even mean? What is a real evolution of our lives? How do we ultimately embrace everything, the beauty and the crazy, the joys and the messes, the bliss and the grit that is a human life? And today we're having one of our favorite kinds of conversations about where the nervous system, trauma responses, and the spiritual path intersect. We're looking at the 4 F's of trauma response: fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. We're talking about how these normal, healthy responses can become identities and therefore keep us from fully nourishing lives. In particular, we're honing in on fawn, also called please, sometimes called appease, if you like rhyming. Fight, flight, freeze, appease. Also sometimes called tend and befriend. Since we haven't spoken as much detail about this particular response, but boy howdy, do we know it from the inside out. And if you consider yourself an empath, this one might strike a chord for you too. If you're enjoying the show, there's a few ways that you can support us. We would love it if you left a review. You can do that on iTunes or Facebook primarily. Helps more people find the show. It's also just really nice to hear from you guys and hear what you're getting from the show. You can also head to blissandgrit.com. There's a subscription for receiving our weekly digest, which we send out on Fridays. It's really just a collection of what kinds of resources are we currently loving. So that can be nice for those of you who want more of that. And we've chosen not to have advertisers on the show, so becoming a patron is the way to help us keep the episodes coming. If you've been benefiting from the show, we'd really appreciate you heading over to Patreon and making a donation. It is for small monthly amounts starting at $1. We both also see clients one-on-one, so feel free to go to the website for more information on that as well. Last thing before we head into the conversation, we both curse sometimes, so if you're in the kind of company where you don't want them to hear our potty mouths, then you might want to wear headphones. Okay, here we go.
Hello, Brooke.
Hey, Vanessa.
How you doing today?
I'm doing good. I'm looking forward to having a conversation with you.
I know. We've had a stretch of guests, it feels like.
Yeah, we totally have. And they're delightful, but it's nice to go back to having just the two of us sometimes, too.
I know, especially because we, in fact, have a guest tomorrow. Just for all of you listening, Brooke and I really have no idea when we're going to have guests. We don't plan this out the way it may appear. It's like a wonderful synchronous flow where we may go months where it's just us two and then months where it's just guests.
Mm-hmm. Well, we haven't gone months with just guests. I can't do that much preparation.
Stretch for a while. Yeah, maybe 4 to 6 weeks. It's a lot of preparation. A lot of speed reading class use. That's what I can say. It's a good thing my parents pushed me into that. Okay, well, today we're going to talk about something that I think is really useful for people to understand. It's certainly been useful in my life. And we're building on our conversations that we've had about the nervous system, which P.S. Brooke, did you notice that I made that YouTube playlist? We have 10 conversations all on the nervous system and spiritual awakening.
Yeah. Speaking of just going with whatever the synchronous flow is, because that was not planned. And now that's exactly what we care about the most.
I know, it's really interesting. So we're going ahead and we're building on that theme because we got requests from a few people who noticed us speak about a different kind of nervous system defense pattern possibly in our episode with Lisa Wimberger, certainly on social media. And that is a defense mechanism we could call fawn, or another name it's called by is placate. And most recently, I heard tend and befriend. So we're going to break that down a little bit. And just to be really on top of it and giving a description, we are going to read a little bit from a couple of sources. So if you are an embodiment geek and you really like to take notes, go ahead and get your pens out because the fun is about to begin.
Note-taking time is upon us.
Okay, so I don't know how old you all are, but I know when I went to school and you took biology classes and they spoke about the sympathetic nervous system and they spoke about what happens to people under stress, they only ever spoke about fight or flight. Do you remember it like that too, Brooke?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And over the years, it came forward that there was a third defense mechanism. You know, I'm not sure who started that. I don't know if it was Peter Levine. He certainly popularized it. But they began to notice that humans and mammals have another, actually, I don't know if it's only humans and mammals, but certainly humans and mammals have another defense called freeze, which is a more primitive defense. And if you heard our interviews with Lisa Wimberger, she spoke about freeze quite a lot. Well, there is what's considered a fourth defensive strategy of the nervous system. According to something I read, it began to be spoken about somewhere around 2000 when a group of researchers recognized that all of the research on the nervous system and our survival strategies had come from research on men. And they wondered what it would be like if they studied women. And in doing so, they came up with this fourth defensive pattern of the nervous system called fawn or placate or tend and befriend.
Or appease, if you like rhyming. Fight, flight, freeze, appease.
Appease. Right. It's like, do you like alliteration?
Right. Pick your rhyming. Alliteration, rhyme.
Yes. I always used placate, but I kind of like fawn. I think I like alliteration. So the four F's really make sense to me. That comes from a psychologist called Peter Walker. At least that's where I'm reading it. It seems as if he invented that term because he wrote about it that way, but wherever that came from. So I think, of course, this is really interesting, and many of you are going to find this interesting because I think it is a commonly utilized defense mechanism of people who consider themselves empathic or people who consider themselves people pleasers. And my guess, and I'd love to hear from all of you about this, my guess is many of you might fall into this category. So see what you think. I'm going to go ahead and read something from PeteWalker.com about the fawn type and what he calls the codependent defense. Okay. Fawn types seek safety by merging with the wishes, needs, and demands of others. They act as if they unconsciously believe that the price of admission to any relationship is the forfeiture of all their needs, rights, preferences, and boundaries. They often begin life like the precocious children described in Alice Miller's The Drama of the Gifted Child, which is an amazing book, by the way, who learn that a modicum of safety and attachment can be gained by becoming the helpful and compliant servants of their parents. So I think we could just start there. It goes a lot deeper than that, but you can begin to get the sense, you know, when they did this research study on women and they noticed what they believed was this fourth defensive pattern. And of course they look evolutionarily and they look back at like, you know, the origin of our species. And they said, you know, there could have been a time where for women, it wasn't smart to fight or run since they had young children with them, but rather to move into this placating, kind of finding harmony pattern, getting people to like them. Wherever this developed, I think it's super relatable. I know this is one of my go-to patterns. As far as I can see by assessing myself, I feel like I'm a fawn, freeze, sprinkle in some fight kind of a person by and large. What about you? Brooke?
Yeah, well, I bring the flight to the party.
Oh,
That's where all my workaholism comes from, and the next big idea. And I'm constantly fantasy moving. Fortunately, my life was intelligent enough to root me so that I couldn't live out every fantasy move I had. I have a lot of flight and fawn and freeze, although it was interesting revisiting fawn, which we've been doing more this week and coming into this episode. It was really intriguing, actually, to see how much that one has cleared out, because it was definitely the dominant pattern by far of my childhood. I was totally parentified, and it explains all of my intimate love relationships except for, recent history since that cleared out. So it was also interesting to be able to track, like, oh, that can pretty thoroughly clear. Like, I can still very easily see my freeze and my flight when those ones come up, but I don't have fawn as a go-to as much, but it ran my world for a long time. I know it very intimately.
Mm-hmm. It is still probably my core pattern that I deal with. And it's probably like that, right? Like, we all have these core patterns because, to a certain extent, separating out personality and our defenses can be like micro slicing something, right?
Yeah.
Like, if I go back and I quote one of my former teachers, John Wellwood, who used to say that a lot of times your defenses were based on your gifts. In other words, you couldn't be the class clown unless you were funny, right? And if that was a way that you found safety and attention, you had to be funny. So you use your gifts. Well, in this way, the way that I conceptualize of it is people who are particularly prone to a fawn defense are so in part because they're good at reading other people, right? They have a knack for reading needs and desires and wants and mood shifts. And they have a knack for being likable, and they have a knack for harmony, right? Mm-hmm. Reestablishing harmony. And so I don't exactly know, I don't know if anyone really knows why unconsciously certain defensive strategies are used. But the way that I see it is that the body mind makes a very quick assessment of what is the circumstance I'm facing, like what is the danger or unsafety that I'm in, and what are the tools at my disposal. And in the case when it's us with just other people, the tools at my disposal are my aptitudes, right? Like, what can I pull upon? So for me, I think I was one of those kids where my parents always said, you were such a good kid. Like, I have other siblings that were like, you came in, you were always sweet, always kind, barely cried a lot, like really good temperamented, really good kid. So that was probably a gift of mine, right? So you go ahead and you employ some of your talents to stay safe. But over time, it starts to become your whole defensive structure. Your ego starts to get built, not only on those aptitudes, but on the idea that I am a person who does this. And moreover, you could start to think things like, this is a good way to be. Mm-hmm. Or you can start to think things like, this is a bad way to be. And then you can start to judge yourself. But you start to build a whole personality structure sometimes on top of these defensive patterns. For example, if you're a flight person, like you were saying, Brooke, someone may just say, I'm a gypsy. But maybe, right? Mm-hmm. Maybe that's one of their aptitudes. They're good at newness. They're good at new experiences, taking them in, change. But maybe in part, it was something that had become a defensive strategy for their ego and then got woven into a personality structure. And now that's just who they think they are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And if we're only, I guess I would like to back up a little and just say, because those of us who are engaged in transformative work and listen to shows like this, and within a culture where we make ourselves problems, we can listen to this with an ear of what's wrong with me? What kind of wrong am I? And context is super helpful, but I just want to back up and say that we all have all of these responses. Like, this is the human condition. It's normal, healthy and adaptive to be able to have a nervous system that can respond in any given moment to all of these different things. So if you're stuck in a traffic jam and you get really irritated, great. Just a little whiff of fight is being employed. You can't flee because you're stuck in gridlock traffic. And so fight goes, traffic in this city is the worst. Okay, great. And like you blow off some steam and then ideally you come back to being regulated. So we don't need to listen to this and then spend our day and our week tracking ourselves for how we're wrong. And we shouldn't employ nervous system defenses. We should, and hopefully we can, and we do. It's what we come with to deal with when life gets too much or overwhelming, which it does plenty. So what we're referring to is if there is a pattern that we start to identify with and it starts to become woven into our core identity. Obviously, this is happening below the level of consciousness. And so it plays out in ways where we have less than ideal or nourishing lives because we're being sacrificed in some way or another to the pattern that we can't have enough conscious awareness of it and whatever it would take for it to be able to complete its action and move through. For it to just do that, to come back to like regulated, it's that we're always playing out the character of that nervous system response. So to give an example of one that I think, because fawn, especially for people who listen to this who are highly empathic, it's going to be a little more murky. And we're talking about being helpful. So it just is murky, right? It's like, well, what's wrong with being helpful? So we'll get into that. But to use one that's more stark and more obvious, if you're the fight persona, if you can never get out of fight, you look like the bully and the one who cannot ever see anything bad about themselves because that feels like vulnerability. So they need to project everything bad onto all the people around them. So they're constantly raging. They're constantly telling everyone else around them how they're wrong. Our president's a great example of being stuck in fight, right? So and we live in a culture that rewards fight. So it's a little more easy to see. But if you're stuck in that persona, then you actually, if you're the fight personality, what you're not going to have for sure is like nourishing, intimate relationships. Who wants to be around somebody who's constantly terrorizing them and telling them what's wrong with them and bullying them? No.
Well, and even if you did, you wouldn't be receiving the nourishment of intimacy.
Right, because you have to be on the defense. Because the thing you're incapable of having as the fight persona is vulnerability. Feeling safe enough to have tenderness, safe enough to have intimacy or ease or love or companionship or compassion. So you lose having a rich, nourishing life. And, polyvagal points to this, that when we have healthy adaptive nervous systems where we have the ability, when we need to choose from any one of these responses, but then we can regulate and come back to homeostasis, that then we have the social engagement system. Then we're able to be healthy, yummy mammals. We enjoy our lives, we connect with friends, we have loved ones, we reproduce, we do all the stuff that yummy mammals are supposed to be here doing. And we want to be able to have that experience. So it is not uncommon that we will have one or a couple of these that become frequent enough if we're people who've dealt with complex trauma or developmental trauma or both, that they become too much of a default and we don't regulate back to having the full range of possibilities open to us. And we start just playing out this character, and this character is going to get the short straw in some categories because they can't be receptive fully to life because they have to, in order to survive, they have to keep playing out this one or two choices of nervous system responses.
Right. Or so the story goes. And that's what's really interesting. And I think Lisa's conversation brings some depth to what we're describing if you listen back to Lisa Wimberger, because you realize that dynamic interplay between the physiology, like what's happening in the body. I imagine also what's happening in the energy systems of the body, right? The energy body. And then the beliefs and narratives you have about yourself and about life. We can look at the very basic one. You know, Byron Katie often says, what, the world is a benevolent place. Mm-hmm. But if you got the storyline based on your life experience, if you got the belief system, the world is a malevolent place, it's very hard for your physiology to almost ever relax unless you're alone, you know, or in some place that you find really sacred and safe. And that's that dynamic interplay of the way those unconscious belief systems that we both inherited from our family, like ancestral trauma, from our culture, and then that we created within our own lives, start to interplay with this physiology. And if you've been through enough, just like what you said, Brooke, the physiology becomes, there's a word that means like rubber band, like it doesn't rebound easily. It doesn't kind of go back into its shape easily. Yeah. We can sort of get stuck in these modes that we're meant to be able to go really fluidly in and out of. Like sometimes it's really smart to just placate someone for a moment. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's really smart to take a stand. Sometimes it's really smart to get quiet and freeze. You know, all of these defenses are naturally intelligent. Where we're discussing is what happens when, based on the narratives and the habits of the nervous system and the habits of the biochemistry and the habits of thought, keep us believing we're still unsafe to be flexible about how we engage with the world. In other words, for me personally, and I've spoken about this on the show, codependency is probably my biggest pattern of trauma. I've had a lot of dissociation in my life, but the habit of foregoing myself to stay in relationship or to take care of somebody has been like the core thing I've been deconstructing. For all of you geeks out there who like the Enneagram, which is a personality test, I test very highly on the 9 scale. And a lot of my personality structure has been built around conflict avoidance. And so what happens is there's like a voice in my head and my body. It's, you know, wherever those implicit voices are that says, not safe to have disagreement, not safe to have conflict, not safe when other people are not happy with you. And so that's so foundational. It's so fundamental that until you get enough awareness, you don't even notice you're telling yourself that. Now, for anyone with developmental trauma, there was a stage of their life where something likely wasn't safe. So to have a competing need against a parent when you are someone who goes towards fawn at some point likely wasn't safe, right? What Pete Walker said about it is this. He said, these children who have fawn are usually the children of at least one narcissistic parent who uses contempt to press them into service, scaring and shaming them out of developing a healthy sense of self, an egoic locus of self-protection, self-care, and self-compassion. That's what he means by a healthy sense of self. So I don't know if all parents are narcissistic that, you know, kids develop this with. I don't tend to label it that much. But if you had a parent who was over controlling, or I've seen this sometimes in clients whose parents felt like they were falling apart, like any emotional disturbance would unravel them, like they were very fragile. The child gets the sense it's not safe if my parents are not okay, right? A child is dependent on their parent. So the child mobilizes to make it okay, either to physically protect themselves if the parent would harm them, if they were in disagreement, if they asserted themselves, or to keep a parent intact who seems like they'll fall apart if the child doesn't caretake them or doesn't agree with them or support whatever their, narrative of survival is. So at some point in life, this innate strategy, this unconscious and innate strategy was literally the best you could come up with to stay intact, because you don't really get to leave your parents. Mm-hmm. Not really. In very rare circumstances, can you leave your parents, or is it safe to leave your parents? Kids may run away, but it's not always the safest situation for them. So you go through life and then unconsciously still think in that same circumstance. The body, the mind, the energy systems are all holding this memory that says, if you were to have disharmony, if you were to upset that person, if you were to go against that person, danger, 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 right? And the alarm bells start to go off in your head every time you cross that line that your body mind deemed as unsafe. And at one point, possibly it was, likely it was, right? But now here we are adults, 45 years old, 50 years old, 30 years old, and we're still habitually people pleasing our boss, or people pleasing our boyfriends or our girlfriends, and placating and surrendering our needs, because so much of our identity and sense of self and vision of who we are and how life works can get built upon that structure of safety. And it's almost like we don't even know what life could look or feel like without it, or who we would be without it, and if we would even be a good person without it. Because I know for me, anytime you have a defensive structure that says danger, danger, and your body mind sets up these alarm bells so you don't cross into a different way of being, there's like a flavor, a feeling associated with the alarm bells. Mine was always guilt and shame. So if I was to make someone unhappy or go against what they really wanted, so therefore they were unhappy, as I cross over, the alarm bells that go off that let me know, don't do this, is guilt and shame. Yeah. Well, then you can see how easy it is to build an identity structure that's based on lack. And like, well, if they're not happy, I'm bad. And if I'm bad, I'm never going to have friends. And I also have to feel what it feels like to feel like I'm bad. So, okay, placate. Right. And you can just build a whole life strategy out of it. Very innocently, very unintentionally.
Yeah. The context of this that we're spelling out a little bit here, I think is so helpful, because as you're describing, in this case and in many cases, what's underneath these structures is shame. And we can, of course, use shame to interpret how we're, did Brooke say that I'm missing out on a full life? Right. How am I wrecking my life? How am I wrecking other people's lives? How am I getting it wrong? And so the more we can see this as not only innocent, but really, really intelligent, and the Fawn defense mechanism in particular, they all have intelligence, but in particular, that takes a pretty savvy ability, right? To be able to read the other people, to get out ahead of what might be in the forecast, the weather forecast of the people in your environment, and how you can caretake. You have to keep your heart open enough to be able to know what other people's needs are. So you're going to be in a painful circumstance, but still using your heart to kind of navigate how to help. So there's a lot of intelligence required of that defense mechanism and of all the defense mechanisms. And we employ them. This is obvious, but sometimes it's so helpful to say the obvious things a few times. We employ them as survival mechanisms. And for everyone who's listening, who's like, yeah, duh, you said that already a million times. Survival means that the reason why we're doing it is that we believe if we don't do it anymore, we actually won't survive. So it's pretty high stakes. And it's very high stakes when it's below the level of consciousness, which is why this context is important. And that we can, in as gentle and compassionate a way as possible, bring these things up to the light of consciousness, so that we can choose differently, so that we can have a broader spectrum from which to operate and receive and enjoy life. but to know that like we're stepping out of a survival habit, not just a bad personality habit. There's a reason why it came into place in the first place. And one thing I would say that I've found tremendously helpful for both myself and for my clients is that when you see, and this is something that requires more complexity than I can necessarily convey in a podcast, right? This is when it gets to the intimate one-on-one work, but I'll bring it forward because I think as a broad concept, it helps. That if we can see the habit, right? And we can see, for example, I've created a personality structure around fawn. Wow. And like I've built my whole life around placating other people as a survival. And I didn't even realize, and it's meant this, this, and this for my life, et cetera, that it can be helpful to think about the one who chose the response, chose being a loose term because nobody, consciously chooses. So the one whose unconscious survival, intelligent, loving self picked this, as you were saying in the beginning, Vanessa, based on aptitudes, abilities, personality, gifts. Can we go back to that one and catch them up? Let them know that that it's over. Let them know experientially. And I do this with clients via a conversation. I know you do work like this too, that there's ways where we can go back to those ones in the past, communicate with them, and catch them up to the future from the point of view of the one in the past. But it's really just the present tense. So that they get the message, the one in the past who was the beginning of these choices, they get the message that there's freedom here and they can contact the safety of your adult life. Because a 3-year-old who can't run away from home, who can't run away from the parent or they're going to get punished even more, who can't speak up or it's going to be, I'll give you something to cry about, that 3-year-old does not have choices. But me at 44, I have a lot of choices. I have a lot of choices and a lot of safety and a lot of resource. And so if I can catch them up and give them a tour, I can be the tour guide for them of what's here now, then I can start to feel the choices I actually have. So this is a little obtuse to bring into a podcast episode because this is process work that's really intimate. But the way I'm using it for myself, me personally, I guide it differently with my clients. But I keep doing this thing. I've told you this about it, but I've told you about it. But where I narrate my life to myself, it is tremendously satisfying. Not all the time. But what I'll do is, like right now, I'm looking at my Connecticut registration certificate for my car. And as I'm making out the check for renewing my car registration, these are things that normally would have hit my survival mechanisms and filled me with actually terror sometimes. And I've never been the kind of person who hasn't renewed her registration. But something about like numbers, dates, is like, I'm doing it wrong, I'm going to screw up, and I will be in prison forever, is how my wiring runs. So to say to myself, oh, look, I'm the kind of person who renews her car registration. I'm the kind of person who is making herself a bowl of soup for lunch. I'm the kind of person who is sitting in her quiet dining room watching the storm clouds gather outside. It's about to rain. For some reason, it's like, if I've already built this bridge, which I've taken the time to do with the past selves, they can come into like, wow, there's a lot of agency here. And it's not that I'm like, gold star, good job. What feels good is the amount of agency I can contact, the amount of safety, and that I can come into my adult body and just be like, oh, look. I'm an adult filled with all kinds of choices and abilities and capacities. And it can be really, really healing to unstick some of this structure of acting out one mode all the time.
It's funny, huh? Because when you're a child and you don't experience agency or choice, or your circumstances are difficult, you just dream about when you'll be an adult and you'll have all this agency and you'll do whatever you want. And then you become an adult and half the time you still feel inside like you're that child who's
still needs to do the same behaviors. I better people please everyone in order to exist. Yeah,
like holy moly. Turns out we have to like actually catch that child up to like where we are in the present, because it's just the way that the brain is wired. It's the way that maybe the human condition is, so to speak. But there's something about the past that is very impressive, if you will, upon the being. And it's like Lisa was pointing out to us in the conversation on neurosculpting, like your past, your beliefs, even your expectations. Like if I was to watch a basketball game, I don't expect to see a monkey on the court. So then you watch this awareness clip she pointed to that you can search on YouTube, and you don't see the monkey that's on the court. Like expectations is as foundational as cultural ones. Like I expect that the desk is solid, so I don't see it as an atomic reality and that it's just particles floating in emptiness, right? Like we have so many expectations, some of them from the collective past and some of them from the personal past. And these expectations keep carrying forward. So now we do have a life, oftentimes one we love or we would have dreamt of if we were young. And yet we may not experience it that way because these belief systems and the habits and behavior patterns associated with them can still be kind of frozen at a point in time when pain was high, since that's what impresses the most memory, is very intense pain or very intense pleasure leaves us with, a bigger impression. So crazy. I think like I remember feeling in my 30s, like I'm an adult, doesn't feel like I'm an adult. And it's like, yeah, because I had all these like child patterns active, But what I do want to say, I want to add, so I've been looking at this particular pattern in myself for a while because it's been such a dominant pattern, and it's been unwinding in what one theoretically could call slow if there was any time at which this should unwind. It is more of a process than I would have expected, first understanding it. But recently I started to notice, like if I got really close to it, okay, what was I fawning against in my household? Well, there was a lot of chaos in my household. Sometimes violence, but just more like a lot of screaming, sometimes violence, a lot of anger, screaming between multiple people. I had siblings and parents, and, they could be yelling at each other. The fear that my parents would separate, the fear you would get hit, you'd be called selfish, like a lot of just interpersonal strife and chaos. And if I feel into it, like as an empath, just a lot of energy bouncing off of the walls at all times. So someone who's gifted at harmony, and as the youngest, this was I think the style most available to me, in part because of my temperament, but also you have older siblings you're contending with too, right? They're always bigger than you and stronger than you.
Not as easy to go to fight. Yeah. Or flight. Yeah.
Forget fight. You could run. And sometimes I'd run in my life, but really to like try to be the sweet little one, like nobody pick on me, I'm so easy, is, it's a good one to use in those kinds of cases. So I had this defensive pattern I'd been using for years, and it became part of my structure. And it's so simple. It's almost like as soon as there's chaos, that pattern wants to come forward. How can I make it better? How can I reestablish harmony? Because harmony is safety. And there's many ways at which you can placate. You can agree with something you don't agree with. You could not say something that you believe because it conflicts with someone's opinion. Just keep your mouth quiet. You can hug someone. Like I used to go and like sit on my dad's lap when I was little to calm him down, right? Because it would work. And I didn't want him to be angry in the household. Too much chaos. Okay. So you start to see that. So you realize, wow, okay, whenever chaos arises or what my brain is interpreting as chaos, up comes this urge, the urge to like, I make it better. right? And there's a couple of different ways that can look. We all have our own repertoire, but here I am, I'm going to make it better. Now, again, like I was describing earlier, we set up what I think of as like these alarm bells around the pattern. Like, so let's say up comes this instinct, I make it better. And then I think to myself, it's not my job. I don't have to fix everybody. I don't have to help everybody. That's their life. And I don't do the thing to make it better. Okay. The alarm bells start to ring. Ding-a-ling-a-ling-a-ling, danger. You've crossed the line we told you not to cross, right? This is bad. And for me, my alarm bells are shame and guilt, like I said earlier. Okay. So now this gets really interesting, because when we start to look at how do we recover out of this pattern, right? Like, what does recovery look like? How do we step into our wholeness and our worth and our self-agency and our boundaries? Saw that, okay, every single time chaos comes up, not only does the pattern to placate come up, but if I don't do it immediately, shame and guilt are right there. So to avoid the pattern tips me into the alarm bells where I'm bad, right? And it's ringing loud, and it all happens so fast, it's really easy to believe it. So the first step is we begin to understand this. And to understand this is to do what I just did. We can start to understand, oh, when this happens, then this happens, and this happens. But it's also to understand through the level of compassion, like, this is a really big, important safety mechanism for you, which means you can't just force yourself into doing something different without that having its own toll on you. And it also allows you to like lovingly guide yourself through. So, okay, recently I've broken out of a lot of the natural behaviors that Fawn would have me do. Okay, I'm not going to do them. We can call that a boundary. I set boundaries. Great. So I set a boundary and then I feel great. Oh my God, it turns out we have a lot of vitality engaged in placation. Not placating gave me all this good energy. The very next day, down I go into a guilt spiral. I shouldn't have. What's the matter? How come I couldn't adapt? How come I couldn't make it better? I should be able to. And that's just the voice of placating. But boy, felt real. Now, if it's big enough, if I've drawn a big enough boundary, which usually probably implies my family, since they're the people I created the pattern in the midst of, it can go really quick into shame and went into like such an abyss for me that there's nothing but the shame, almost like you're so bad for doing this. Everyone's going to die. They're going to die. You're going to die. Everyone's going to suffer. Like it's catastrophic, right? So a couple of things have been helpful for me. So I see all of that, and seeing it has been really helpful because I know not to believe the guilt. It's just an alarm bell. I know not to believe the shame, though that one can be, if it collapses in, a lot more alluring because it's so fundamental to that structure. And what, of course, is it that I need in that moment? It's not just enough to understand it. We can call understanding truth. Here's the truth. This is what I was raised in. This was the result on me. This is now how it shows up in my life. Okay, that's truth. That's understanding. What supports the softening and the healing and the shifting of these defensive patterns for me so far is that bit of truth loaded with a lot of love. And that's why I think talking about Fawn is useful, because if you understand it as a physiological neuro safety mechanism, I don't know if neurosafety is a word, P.S., but I like it. So
trademark, patent pending, trademark, whatever.
Yes, trademark, dang. All right, save that one. We'll forget in like a hot second. So feel free to steal it. Apparently, so if you have that pattern where that's what's happening in your neurosafety mechanisms, you start to realize you can have a little compassion. Like, oh, it's not just like, I read a meme on Instagram and it's like, don't let anybody cross your boundaries. Like, yeah, okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Made a mental note. Yeah.
I really didn't want to, but the whole world depended on me doing it, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's how it feels. And so I think it's important to understand the depth and breadth of like, okay, this is something that can be very fundamental for me. For some people, it's easier. Like Brooke, you shifted yours. It didn't mean it wasn't hard work, but for some people, it'll loosen up.
Mine was just rock bottom. I rock bottomed my way out of Fawn.
Night of the soul.
Anyway. Yes.
Easy breezy. Yeah. But I mean, no need to expect it to be hard, but certainly if it is hard, have a lot of compassion for understanding, okay, this is a neurosafety mechanism. And then what helped me when I hit a rock bottom of shame was bringing a lot of love to it. And I did it in such a primal way. And this was an exercise offered by a program I'd done with Matt Kahn called Total Integration. But I just took my hands, knowing my hands are energy healers. My hands have healing energy in them, and you have chakras in the center of your hands. And I just put them to different places of my body. In this case, I did the chakras, actually, the energy centers, but I put them wherever I wanted to, wherever I had pain, if it was in my shoulders or my legs as well, or discomfort. And I just began to say all of the things that young child, the one you were talking about, Brooke, like whenever this got created, really needed to hear. Mm-hmm. And because shame was the flavor of the day that was coming up, it was like, you're good. You're lovable. You don't need to earn your love. You don't need to earn being liked. I like you. You're safe. You can be who you are. And those were really the types of things that I think probably a lot of people who have this particular setup around Fawn might need to hear, like, you're safe to be who you are. Mm-hmm. It's okay, right? I like you.
You're welcome. Yeah.
Welcome. I love you. You're good, right? As you are. Because there's this, I'm good if I make everybody happy. I'm good if I take care of everybody. But what if I have a different need? So they don't feel taken care of? Then how do I get a sense of worth, right? Our worth can be codependent, right? Externally dependent. So just went through my body, bringing that sense of love and saying everything that part of me needed to hear. And I could see physiologically my heart rate calmed, the heartbeat softened. Like you can feel energetically that even in the beginning, though it may felt more like an exercise, like I'm not feeling it as I'm saying it, I love you. I wasn't feeling it because I was in a state of shame. As I went, the feelings got more and more, the love got more and more, the softness and tenderness got more and more. And it's like I could feel my body responding. And as my body responded, the love within me was more accessible and I could feel the love come through to my body more. And it was just a really nice, beautiful softening mechanism, because when we look at these defensive patterns, and we begin to see the truth of how some of these things unfolded in our lives, we can start to think, well, who am I? Am I nothing but this pattern? And it can feel really raw and really tender and really, I guess, because unworthiness is at the base, it can be really ripe with this sense like, but I am unworthy. That's what I'm contacting as I unravel the pattern. So to bring this just super basic love to the body, which is part of it, right? That's what we're talking about, the physiology. And then also the energy body and the being and the words and the love and the brain's hearing it and it's recording it. All of that can be a really, really good tool to have in your toolkit, along with understanding this. And then eventually, along with beginning to take risks and set boundaries and have different needs and not take care of people.
So I mentioned before that I had rock bottomed out of placate. So that was because I had an abusive relationship as an adult. That turned into trauma therapy, et cetera, et cetera. Timeline goes on, led us up to now where I have way more resources. So I don't want to glorify suffering and say, oh, sometimes you can rock bottom your way out of a pattern. That was not ideal. Took a lot of years of recovering. But with these resources that we have now, which hopefully we can bring to the forefront for more people, you're describing a really beautiful practice for tenderness specific to Fawn, as a way to be able to do the thing that would let you put down the pattern. You can set a boundary and still be worthy, still be good, still be lovable. And so I just want to bring in a couple of things that have been helpful to me as I've shifted out of a couple of other patterns, or I'm shifting out of patterns of freeze and flight. And I can talk about fight too. That we're talking about how can you put down the habit of needing to only react that way and be able to scan for the safety, scan for the good, scan for the nourishment. So with freeze, the reason Locke Kelly's inquiry, what is here right now if there isn't a problem to solve? That is a magic inquiry for somebody who lives out the the flight state a lot. So if your habit is flight, what do I have to do? How do I have to act? What do I need to fix? Or just workaholism, or I'm so busy addiction, that kind of stuff. What is here right now, if there isn't a problem to solve, is not saying, sit down, shut up, and meditate for 30 hours. It's saying, look, there's goodness here. And you start to be receptive to the amount of safety that's in the present moment. So flight starts to soften. With freeze, what I had to do, because when I went into freeze, I was having limb weakness, exhaustion, couldn't move around a lot, and had to give up one of my favorite things, which is moving in the world, hiking, all that stuff. And I ultimately went back to a gym environment that I feel very safe in. I know it's a community I've been a part of for many years. I think the programming is really intelligent, but it's a very upregulated environment. Loud music and weights clanging and, people jump roping really fast and running around and timer boards. And so what I had to do was scan for the goodness in upregulation. So I would look around and I would have to really ground into the moment and say, look, there's no harm happening here. And then I could look at the women jump roping or lifting weights and just kind of fall in love with them. Like, look, there's no harm happening here. We're all just like having this amazing time. So I could put down freeze as I picked up the safety in the moment. And with fight, it would be, can you begin to feel safe enough to notice how good like intimacy feels, for example? So somebody, hands you your dinner plate, the dinner table, just to take a moment and be like, there's goodness here. Can you receive? You'll feel a little vulnerable if you're somebody who's habituated to fight. Just going, thank you for my dinner would feel a little vulnerable. But if you're ready to put that pattern down, you have to also pick up the safety at the same time. So that would be noticing, there's goodness here. So we're never talking about shoving ourselves into the opposite extreme because it will be re-traumatizing.
Yeah, I mean, with fight and flight, I can do a lot of breathing exercises and get so much out of that. Calms me down, gets me present, like even just breath. But with freeze, breath is tricky. If you just do nice, slow, deep breaths, it doesn't necessarily shake you out of freeze.
Yeah.
Maybe some, what do they call it? Like a breath of fire or some activating breaths, something like you were describing. You go to the gym, there's music,
scan around.
That are like
this is
activating.
Good. This is safe. Mm-hmm.
Can be really safe. With Fawn, the same thing. What's funny about using things like breath is with Fawn, you're kind of designed in that pattern to like either use your power to help other people, like your power is dedicated to like protecting others or helping others. So there's that mobilization. But it's often that you're designed to like suppress your own needs and feelings.
Yeah. There's and like so not able to exist underneath it.
Yeah, so you can kind of breathe your way into continually suppressing your feelings.
Exactly. To be calm and placate better.
I was thinking the other day about how we did that episode, Your Spiritual Path is Not a Benzo, and how sometimes we could use breathing as a benzo. Like,
for the placate types, like, I'm just even
like
more in equanimity. More equanimity.
Get that, like one of the telltale signs that I have Fawn is when like something's not working for me interpersonally, my telltale give is like, well, I should just get better at this. Maybe I have a trigger and I should heal it. I should resolve it. I should be able to. What if I found more compassion? What if I find forgiveness, right?
I'm so glad you're saying this, because everyone who's listening is going, oh my God, me too.
Yes,
this is so the empath pattern.
Negotiation that like, if I could be better, I could tolerate this thing that's like really annoying and intolerable at that moment for whatever the reason is. Like, I have to figure it out. So you can see how all spiritual platitudes can start to be problematic for the fawn type, because they could be co-opted by the ego structure to justify why you shouldn't be you.
Yep.
You, all humans have needs, have preferences, have wants. It's part of having a body. We're not angels, right? We're humans, bodies. They have needs, preferences, and wants. So you can use spiritual platitudes like that, like just be more forgiving, be more compassionate, more understanding. And you can do the same. Like, you can breathe to get enough footing to keep doing what you shouldn't be doing.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right? Or I shouldn't say it like that, shouldn't be doing, but doing the thing that's a replication,
that's causing you pain. Yeah.
Of the pattern that's ultimately causing you pain. And, you know, remember, on every journey, if you heard Lisa Wimberger's story, she went from the way she broke out of freeze was by imagining fight over and over again, right? She imagined fight. And that helped her activate and like move out of the more primitive part of the brain into the middle of the brain. But it's not like she was going to live and fight.
Yeah.
From there comes the next intelligent movement towards compassion, understanding, peace, and all of these things. It's just that if we don't follow the actual progression, we can do the bypass. So the same thing with fawn. I'm saying it's inadvisable for fawn to justify, I should be more forgiving. You're already forgiving. I should be more compassionate. P.S. You're already compassionate. First, it's like learning that you get to exist, have boundaries, have needs, that conflict is okay, chaos is okay, harmony is not the only goal in this reality. Like the Big Bang Theory, plenty of things can happen that are amazing from collisions, all okay. Once you get there, perhaps you're going to go back to a journey of breathing and peace and love and all of those wonderful things. But we don't want to shortcut it, because you know that's called a bypass, and it doesn't get us physiologically actually out of the conundrum, out of the kind of dreamlike state that our narratives have kept us in. It doesn't break us free. It's just using it as a way of replicating it. So we could be intelligent. Don't think anything we're saying is like where you stay forever.
Yeah.
It is just the next intelligent understanding, using your wisdom about mind, body, energy, spirit, to say, how do I, like, what is the actual step towards healing? Like, what is the actual next step towards this being feeling whole, present, which you have to feel safe to feel present, and at one at the same time?
Thank you so much for being a part of our community and for listening to today's show. The show notes, including any of the resources that we mentioned, live at blissandgrit.com. If you go to the website and scroll down, you're going to see each episode's separate post. The resources are tucked away in each post. Our member platform, again, is at patreon.com/blissandgrit, where you can donate to the show and get rewards for your support. Huge, tremendously giant thank you to all of you who are over there already. It means so much to us that you're going to take time out of your busy lives and actually donate financially, even if it's a small amount, to say that this work is meaningful to you and that it's impacting you enough that you want to keep it coming. So thank you so much. And of course, you can also come hang out with us on Instagram and Facebook, or subscribe on the website, which is blissandgrit.com. And with that, we just send out one email a week on Fridays. It's the digest of what things we're currently reading, listening to, meditating with, and enjoying, that kind of thing. We are so grateful for all the reviews that you've written, the membership support you've provided, and all the notes you send. We'll be back next week.